You can't be serious. Federal Primox Grazin regarded the entry form with extreme distaste. Kinetics? Kinetics, Zoldar confirmed. They throw bits of metal. I know what kinetic weapons are, Zoldar, the Primox harumphed. What I don't know is why the humans would enter in one of the premier weapons exhibitions in the galaxy. He glared down at the application. Or why humans would be allowed to enter at all. They've barely been spacefaring for 20 revolutions. Zoldar fluttered his wings, the Zist equivalent of a shrug. They like throwing rocks. It's worked for them so far. Primox Grazin gave another great harumph. Rocks. They might as well be throwing their own dung. Bunch of primitives. The Primox reached for the rejection stamp. I think we should see what they have to offer, Great Primox, Zoldar suggested. I've been hearing some disturbing rumors from the frontier. No one cares about the frontier, Zoldar. The Primox slammed the rejection stamp down on the human's application. No one goes there but bugs, refugees, and outlaws. Zoldar ignored the slur against his species. The humans go there, Primox, he elaborated. They've established several colonies. No one cares, the Primox repeated. He stamped another rejection on the form for good measure. They found a way around our nullifiers, Zoldar added. The Primox paused in the act of handing the rejection form back. They what? Nullifiers were the pinnacle of weapons technology. They detected and shut down all weapons in a set radius. Some of the more advanced models could do so selectively, allowing the wielder and their allies to use weapons while the enemy could not. Nullifiers were strictly controlled by the feds, so much so that even Grazin had only gotten his mitts on a few of them. The Zist clacked his antennae together. In the past 2 months, 7 outlaw gangs have been snuffed out in or near the frontier. They were all killed the same way. The Primox sat back, idly brushing his fur. Like all Phylaxians, his fur had been orange at one point. Age had rendered it a distinguished silver. Grazin spent a lot of attention and a great deal of money keeping it soft and shiny. Go on. Bits of metal thrown at high speed, the bug continued. In all but one case, there were no witnesses, and no one has come forward to take credit for the kills. The only connection between the gangs, aside from being outlaws, was that they had all recently raided human colonies. Is that so? Primox Grazin had noticed a decrease in sales on the black market. Providing weapons to the unlicensed had been a lucrative side venture, but several of his wealthier clients had ceased their purchases. He'd almost scaled back his operation, fearful the other feds might have taken an interest somehow. You said all but one. Yes, Zoldar clacked his antennae again. Annoying habit, that. Grazin wasn't fond of bugs, but Zoldar had been an able assistant, and his status made him pliable. The Zist continued. The last case involved a Grodo by the name of Brill. Brill? Grazin sat forward. Brill had been one of his largest clients, a scion of the Azure House of the Grodo nobility. He'd been typical for the breed, spoiled, entitled, and cruel. He'd paid Grazin a fortune for the toys he needed to go play outlaw and stomp all over the Prims. Brill Azure? That Brill? Yes, Primox, said the Zist. The feds and the House of Azure both investigated. They learned it was the work of a human. A human? The Primox blinked. Wait, a human? Just one? It would appear so, Primox, Zoldar confirmed. The human docked at Kental Station in an unregistered craft. He murdered 23 outlaws in or near their ship, then found Brill and the remaining 3 in a local cantina. The bartender's cybernetics recorded the encounter. The Zist pulled out a holo recorder and passed it over. Grazin watched a man gun down 4 people. "The human is impressively quick," he remarked, "but the weapons aren't all that." He paused. All 3 of his eyebrows drew down. "Brill had a nullifier." "Yes," said Zoldar. "We have confirmed that it was active during the engagement." "And the guns fired anyway." Grazin reviewed the footage again. The humans' weapons weren't particularly destructive. Even a basic plasma caster could deal more damage. Still, they were lethal enough in the hands of the human. "Interesting. How?" "The humans' weapons don't have a power source," Zoldar explained. "They are chemically propelled." "Chemically?" Grazin frowned. "They use individual cartridges," said the Zist. "Each cartridge contains a chunk of metal and a small explosive charge. The explosive launches the projectile." "Small explosions to throw rocks." Primox Grazin stroked his fur. It was primitive, barely a step above rubbing 2 sticks together to make fire. And yet, no power source, you say? "None, Primox." The Zist kept his tone calm, but his antennae betrayed his excitement. "Not only do they sidestep nullifier technology, but security scans don't register them as weapons." His wings fluttered. "At least, not yet." "Very interesting." Grazin sat back, thinking. Nullifiers were the ultimate trump card. They allowed the feds to control every engagement. "If your kind had had that sort of weapon during the bug hunt..." "It wouldn't have been called the bug hunt," Zoldar finished. "We would have won." "Don't rise above yourself, Bug," the Primox warned. He glared at the Zist until Zoldar lowered his antennae in submission. Grazin grunted. "You might have a point, though. Primitive or not, a ranged weapon that can bypass security and nullifiers both could be worth a fortune. Several fortunes." He glared down at the form he'd just rejected. "We might have to let those primitive lunkers in after all." "I made an extra copy of the application," Zoldar told him. "Just in case." Primox Grazin would spend the next 3 months researching the humans. Well, not personally. He made Zoldar do it. What he learned was not encouraging. The humans were even more primitive than he'd expected. They'd made a shoddy attempt at terraforming the planet nearest them, but had abandoned it after a few fruitless decades. The hyperdrive they'd cobbled together was a barely functional accident, and they'd used that pathetic excuse for FTL to spend the next 60 revolutions trying and failing to colonize worlds no other species would have bothered with. Even the bugs knew there was a vast difference between nearly habitable and actually habitable, but it was a lesson the humans had yet to learn. The humans did not possess a unified government. Their home planet was divided into over 200 nations, and there were no less than 19 full-scale wars going on at that very moment. Upon encountering the Federal United Worlds, the humans had devolved even further into petty conflict. Nations, corporations, and wealthy individuals all started sending envoys into the big empty, doing everything they could to beg, borrow, or steal technology from their betters. The good news, if Grazin wanted to call it that, was that they had found no takers. No one was interested in trading with a bunch of dung-smeared primitives. Earth was a backwater planet in a boring section of the galaxy. It had only the most basic of elements, and there wasn't a useful spatial anomaly within 100 light-years of their space. No one even cared enough to conquer the lunkers. The humans were weak, slow to breed, and even slower to reach maturity. Their average intelligence was so low it was a miracle they'd achieved sapience. Grayson could not imagine a more worthless species. Even the bugs were better than this. Grazin very much wanted to ban the humans from his expo, Their gormless, chaotic nature and pathetic kinetics would be a blight on the greatest weapons exhibition in the galaxy. Unfortunately, the human Firearms were too valuable an opportunity to pass up, and he was too public a figure to contact them in secret. Too many spies, too much risk his competitors would catch on. The Primox intended to fleece those Prims for as much as he could, and that wouldn't happen if they thought they had other options. Primox Grazen's mood steadily decreased as the exhibition grew closer. The very thought of those primitive weaklings stinking up his pristine expo drove him to distraction. Zoldar bore the brunt of his displeasure, but soon his entire staff was tiptoeing around him. The Primox didn't care. He heaped abuse on anyone unlucky enough to cross his path. He only forced himself to calm down when he was home, and only because 3 of his wives threatened to leave him. 2 weeks before the expo began, Grazen received a call. It was Primox Frel Viridian. Primox Frel was a Grodo noble, and would be one of the other judges at the exhibition. He appeared on Frel's viewer with his customary scowl. Frel was a large green specimen, wide and tall, with 2 arms and 2 legs, and a body covered in bulky plates of armor. Like all Grodo nobles, his carapace was heavily engraved with sigils and gold filigree. Like all Grodo nobles, he was a bit of an ass.
"This is an outrage, Grazen!"
The Grodo started shouting the moment Grazen accepted the call.
"I demand an explanation!" "Everything's an outrage with you, Frel."
Grazen rolled all 3 of his eyes.
"You're going to have to be more specific." "Humans!" Frel bellowed. "You're allowing humans into the exhibition!" "You just now noticed?"
Grazen raised 2 of his eyebrows.
"I approved their application months ago. You should pay better attention, old friend." "Don't call me that!" Frel snapped. "I'm no friend of yours!" "Not friends?"
Grazen placed both hands on his neck in pretend shock. The Grodos were particular about interpersonal relationships. Calling one a friend without their consent was an insult, which was why Grazen did so at every opportunity.
"I'm hurt, Frel. Really, I am." "Enough of your games," growled Frel.
Antagonizing a Grodo noble was a bad idea for most people, but even Frel wouldn't dare attack a fellow Primox. The Federal United Worlds did not tolerate attacks on their high-level officials, not even from other officials of the same rank.
"I rejected the humans. Primox Clean rejected the humans. Only you approved their entrance. Why?" "Curiosity, mostly," Grazen drawled. "They're an interesting species." "Don't play primitive with me, Grazen," Frel warned. "You're the only Primox more arrogant than I am, and I've had bowel movements that were more interesting than those lunkers." "I wouldn't be so sure about that, old friend," Grazen smiled. "Surely you've heard what happened to Brill Azure." "The former heir of House Azure," Frel snorted, smiling in spite of himself. "I did hear. Gunned down by a human," he chortled. "Can you imagine the shame?" "A single human killed a Grodo noble and 26 heavily armed outlaws," said Grazen. "Does that not sound like a species worth meeting?" "An outlier!" Frel waved the idea away. "The rest of the humans have been easy pickings. Even your species produces a capable warrior every once in a while." "An exceptional outlier," Grazen argued. "The Brill gang was only one of 12 this human has slain. In addition, 4 of House Azure's strike teams have been found riddled with holes." "I know!" Frel barked a laugh. "Oh, what I'd give to see the look on Braun Azure's face! Not that he'd dare to show it right now." He laughed harder. "Yes, quite amusing." Grazen allowed himself a small smile. "Considering the unique nature of this human." He frowned. "What are they calling him again?" The lead dealer, said Frel. He snorted. Stupid name. Considering what this lead dealer has accomplished, Grazin continued, I thought it wise to meet his species for myself. I want to see if they are more than they seem. You mean you want to see if they have any technology worth stealing? Grazin scowled. That's not a good enough reason to be defiling our expo, Grazin. Knowledge is power, Frel. Grazin gave him a level look. The feds may be complacent about a new species entering the galaxy, but I am not. If these humans pose a danger, it is better to know now. A danger? Those prims? Frel sneered. You are getting paranoid in your old age, Grazin. Those idiots haven't even managed a unified government. Their ships are barely void-worthy. They're nothing. We said the same thing about the Zist, Grazin reminded him, not too long ago. Primox Frel grunted. His eyes narrowed. I think you are skimming me, Philaxian. You've never been patriotic. You are loyal to your bank accounts and nothing else. That's as may be, Grazin smiled, but entry into the ship-mounted weapons category of the exhibition is subject to my approval and mine alone. The humans will be coming. Do you really think they'll have anything worth seeing? Frel demanded. No, the Philaxian admitted. I think there'll be a terrible embarrassment. If the humans have anything resembling a proper weapon, I'll eat my own fur. Is that a fact? Frel gave him an evil grin. Well, damn! Now I'll have to root for those lunkers. I'd really like to see that. I'll bet you would, Grazin harumphed. They're coming, and there's nothing you can do about it. I'll be happy to tell Kveen the same thing, if she bothers to call. She won't, Frel assured him. She hates you even more than I do. Good. Now it was Grazin's turn to sneer. Now, if you are done wasting my time, some of us have actual work to do. Goodbye, old friend. Frel snarled, but Grazin cut off the call before the Grotto could say anything else. The humans arrived 4 days before the expo was due to start. After examining Zoldar's scan of their ship, Grazin was impressed they'd made it there at all. Oh, the vessel was pretty enough. It was 300 meters long, a rectangular hull made sleek with graceful curves. Gun ports and missile launchers were clearly intended to give it a fearsome appearance. One gun was so long it took up the entire upper spine of the ship and stuck out another 10 meters besides. A fine-looking ship, if you were some ignorant yokel. Grazin took one look and barely restrained himself from turning those primitives away, or better yet, blasting them out of the sky. Their hyperdrive was so basic it was barely functional, and so slow the humans must have started for the expo 2 months before turning in their application. The vessel had no inertial dampeners, no artificial gravity, and no armor. It was forced to rely on chemical propulsion to maneuver. It didn't even have a singularity reactor. The lunkers had to use nuclear fission to power the ship. Inefficient fission at that. Grazin could see no other reason they'd need 10 nuclear reactors to power a scrap heap like that. The Primox calmed himself with thoughts of profit. No matter how weak, stupid, or revolting these prims might be, they had guns that could ignore a nullifier. Grazin wanted those guns. He wanted them very much. If he had to swallow his dignity and hobnob with bum-licking savages to get them, he would. Grazin did not contact the human ship himself, nor did he have his assistant, Zoldar, do it for him. Instead, he told Zoldar to ask Zoldar's assistant to tell a lesser assistant to make contact. Grazin doubted the humans would notice the slight. He was certain they didn't have the gigs to speak up if they did. Several hours later, a delegation of humans were led into the Grazin's office. The Primox's office was a tidy place. Large, lavish, and tasteful.
The walls were lined with row after row of accomplishments and accolades. Primox Grazin sat in a chair that may as well have been a throne, behind a desk composed entirely of grugshell. A dozen armed guards stood outside the office at all times, but their presence was unnecessary. Automated defenses would vaporize anyone who dared accost the Primox in his place of power, or anyone who caused offense. Anyone he wanted to vaporize, really. Grazin controlled them by neural link. There were 3 of the primitives, 1 tall male in a military uniform, 1 short female in black pants, a white blouse, and a black jacket, 1 short male in what appeared to be a brand new white shirt, white pants, and a long white coat. None of them were armed. All of them were ugly. They had fur above their eyes and at the top of their heads. Nowhere else. Disgusting. The 3 of them knelt, each tapping the center of their chest 3 times. They waited for the Primox to speak. They were polite, at least. Grazin waited an appropriate minute, and then said,
"Rise and be noticed."
The humans stood up. Even the shortest was taller than the Primox, but Grazin's raised chair let him look down on them. The female spoke first.
"Greetings, Great Primox. I'm Heather Wu, Executive Liaison for Interstellar Incorporated."
She gestured at the tall male to her right.
"This is Commander James Waters of the USS Glorious Purpose, and this,"
she gestured at the short male to her left,
"is Dr. Frank Arroway from Research and Development."
Heather, Commander, and Doctor. Grazin carefully memorized the names. Then he swallowed his disgust and smiled at the creatures.
"Greetings. It is a pleasure to meet you all."
He pointed at himself.
"You know who I am."
He pointed at the Zist standing beside his desk.
"This is Zoldar, my personal assistant and chief of staff."
"Thank you, Great Primox."
Heather returned the smile.
"And thank you for this opportunity. The other judges rejected our applications. You're the only one who gave us a chance."
Opportunity indeed. The prize for a good showing was only a few 100 million gudongs, but the publicity and possible contracts could make or break a company. Grazin still wasn't sure lead dealer weapons were worth giving these lunkers such a chance. Still, he needed to be diplomatic. He leaned down with a conspiratorial look.
"The other judges are idiots," he confided, "but I wouldn't say that outside of this office."
"Of course, Great Primox."
Heather looked down and brushed her hair demurely.
"Don't do that,"
Grazin told her sharply. He barely resisted the urge to vomit.
"Oh."
The female looked up.
"I'm sorry, Great Primox. I was told that was a gesture of respectful submission."
"It is."
Grazin raised 2 of his eyebrows.
"But only if you are seeking a husband."
"Oh."
Embarrassment flashed across her features, followed quickly by anger. Then her face was smooth again. Heather tapped her chest twice.
"My apologies, Great Primox."
"That's not how the gesture is used either,"
Grazin informed her. The poor, stupid, gullible prims. He carefully hid his amusement, allowing only irritation to leak into his tone.
"I would advise you to stop trying to use Phylaxian idioms. I would also advise you to find whoever taught them to you and shoot that lunker in the face."
He scowled.
"They have purposely trained you wrong, as a joke, no doubt."
"I see."
Another flash of rage, quickly controlled. She bent at the waist.
"Thank you, Great Primox."
"And drop the great," Grazin ordered. "Just Primox will do, or Primex Grazin if you want to be formal."
"Yes, Primox."
The woman nodded sharply.
"Better."
Grazin sat back, regarding the humans.
"Now, I'm a busy man, so I'll make this quick. While I am willing to give you a chance to prove yourselves, I am doing so with an ulterior motive."
The humans looked at each other. Heather spoke.
"And what might that be, Primox?"
Grazin leaned forward.
Are you familiar with the human known as the lead dealer?
The lead dealer?
The female's face crunched in confusion. Doctor's eyes widened in amazement.
You mean the lead dealer is real? I thought he was just a story.
Who is the lead dealer?
Heather asked Doctor.
A vigilante,
Grazin answered before the other human could.
Or an assassin. We are not sure. What we do know is that he has single-handedly killed nearly 200 people.
Oh.
Heather was silent for a moment, thinking.
Did you want us to help you find him somehow?
The authorities will catch the human in due course,
the Primox lied. The feds didn't give two spits about the frontier. They couldn't be bothered to deal with the outlaws terrorizing settlements. They certainly didn't care about some primitive lunker gunning the outlaws down in turn.
No, what I'm interested in are the weapons he used. What can you tell me about a tungsten sabbot thrower?
Sabbot?
Heather was confused again. Grazin had marked her as the leader of the delegation, but she was surprisingly ignorant. Or perhaps not so surprisingly, humans being what they were.
He means sabot.
Commander spoke.
A tungsten sabot, only it's pronounced sabot. Unless you're some kind of yokel.
Primox Grazin fixed his stern gaze on Commander.
And what can you tell me of this sabot?
It's a category of ammunition, said Commander. A sabot is a supporting device attached to a projectile to keep it aligned in the barrel of a gun. They see some use in artillery, but they're more common in shotguns.
Shotguns?
The Primox prompted. One of our oldest and most versatile firearms. This time it was Doctor who spoke. They can take a wide variety of different ammunition, from pellets to explosives to incendiaries. The human gave a knowing smile. And armor-piercing sabot rounds, of course.
Shotguns.
The Primox nodded slowly.
That must be it.
Noting the human's confusion, the Primox elaborated.
Before I was a federal Primox, I owned a weapons manufacturing company. I am something of a connoisseur when it comes to weapons.
A Primox was not allowed to own a business. It was considered a conflict of interest. Fortunately, Grazin's fellow feds were as canny and corrupt as he was. No one had blinked an eye as he signed the company over to his wives.
And you would like to see some of ours?
Heather nodded, getting it.
I would,
the Primox confirmed.
I'm going to be honest, human. Kinetics are not highly regarded in the Federal Unified Worlds. Your weapons would be considered quaint at best.
He steepled his fingers.
Still, I believe a market could be found for them. If nothing else, I would enjoy a few of these firearms to add to my collection.
Heather Wu gave Commander James Waters a considering look.
You know, the Glorious Purpose has an extensive armory.
No, said Commander.
What do you mean, no?
Heather demanded.
This is...
The Glorious Purpose is a military vessel of the European Union, Commander reminded her. We cannot give away our ordnance to anyone.
This is a joint venture, Waters,
Heather countered.
I've got full discretion.
Not with our ordnance, you don't.
Commander was firm. Wait a minute, Doctor interrupted. He was looking at the other two with a mix of shock and disappointment. Are you telling me the only guns you have are in the ship's armory? Commander raised an eyebrow.
Where else would they be?
You've got to be kidding me. Doctor stared in disbelief.
What do you mean?
Asked Heather. What I mean, Doctor slowly enunciated, is we just traveled for 5 goddamn months to visit the biggest weapons exhibition in the goddamn universe. He was almost shouting. And none of you thought to bring any goddamn guns? Primox Grazin honed in on Doctor like a laser.
Did you?
Doctor grinned. Of course I did. I'm not an idiot. I've got enough to set up a booth if I want.
I can't authorize a booth,
Grazin told him.
I only have jurisdiction over ship-mounted weapons at the expo.
He gave the human a smile.
But I am very interested in acquiring some of your hardware.
That can be arranged, said the human. Heather spoke up.
Interstellar Inc. is a tech company with an emphasis on space travel. We don't make firearms, but I have some contacts I can put you in touch with.
Excellent.
Grazin gave the humans a satisfied nod. He grimaced slightly as his gaze fell back on Doctor.
Unfortunately, I will not have time to examine your wares myself. The expo will be keeping me quite busy. My assistant will meet with you instead.
He pointed at Heather.
Zoldar will coordinate with you as well. We would like to meet your contacts.
The Primox made a show of checking the time on his desk clock.
I am afraid this is all the time I have allotted for this meeting. You may go now.
The next 5 days were a flurry of activity. As one of the 3 acting judges, Primox Grazin was obligated to sit through a large number of weapons demonstrations. It was a task he enjoyed, even if the newest models were little different than the ones from the previous year. True innovation was rare these days. It was much easier and more profitable to slap a few shiny features onto an existing gun and increase the price. Still, Grazin loved guns. He liked watching people shoot things almost as much as he liked shooting things himself. As a bonus, there were no humans. The other Primoxes had barred them from entering the expo. Grazin had put up a token protest, but had been quite pleased not to have those disgusting prims mucking about in his pristine gun convention. The downside was that Zoldar was spending a lot of time on the human ship, and Grazin had been forced to make do with backup assistants to organize his day. The Primox understood the necessity, but it still irked him. He hadn't realized just how smooth and efficient the Zist was until he was forced to do without him. On the 6th day, the ship-mounted weapons exhibition began. Primox Grazin sat in judgment along with Frel and Ktheen. Ktheen was a Scarlac, one of the few species uglier than humans and bugs. She had 6 arms, 2 of which ended in pincers. She had 6 legs and a 2-meter tail that ended in a venomous stinger. Her exoskeleton was a sickly yellow in color, and her 6 faceted eyes were vomitous orange. She was also the most unpleasant being Grazin had ever worked with.
So,
the Scalac sneered, or at least she sounded like she was sneering. Mandibles are not particularly expressive.
The time has finally come, the event that will embarrass us all.
Only if you are easily embarrassed,
Grazin countered.
Who wouldn't be embarrassed by such filth?
Ktheen dripped with disdain.
Humans, really?
Complain all you want.
Grazin scowled at the creature.
Ship-mounted weapons are my purview, and I decided to give them a chance.
And how much did they pay for this chance?
Ktheen hissed the words.
How many gudongs is enough to sully this exhibition?
Her mandibles clacked.
Or maybe they offered more than money. Has one of them agreed to be your plaything, Grazin? Has exploiting your secretaries become so boring that you are looking outside of your species now?
Grazin fantasized about turning the Scarlac into a pile of ash.
It's always such a pleasure talking to you, Ktheen,
the Primox deadpanned.
I think about you often, you know.
I don't,
the Scarlac spat.
I do, Grazin insisted. Every time I smell feces, your name comes to mind. I'm glad the humans are here,
Frel spoke. The other 2 turned to stare at the Grodo.
You are?
Ktheen clacked in disbelief.
Why?
I'm hoping those lunkers surprise us.
Primox Frel grinned.
Grazin promised to eat his own fur if they do.
The judges continued to bicker as the first entry moved into position. A Geelong-class battlecruiser, courtesy of Stinger Industries, Ktheen's company, though she didn't own it on paper. Grazin watched the view screen as the long, slender vessel approached the target. The target was a cube of pure inviolium, 10 meters across. Inviolium was the most durable substance ever recorded, an alloy of several exotic elements combined and compressed to an extreme density. Its invention had revolutionized ship-to-ship combat. The alloy's melting point was so high that an armored vessel could skim the surface of a star without ill effect, and so strong that a mere millimeter of armor rendered a ship immune to explosives and kinetics. The invention of inviolium had rendered all space combat into a carefully calculated slugfest. No weapon had been found that could penetrate the armor in one shot. Only repeated strikes from high-energy weapons could degrade it, and only if one managed to strike the same spot dozens or even hundreds of times. There were downsides, of course. Inviolium was highly radioactive. Extensive measures had to be taken to shield the interior of the ship, and armored vessels weren't allowed on a planet's surface without a thorough examination of their external containment shielding. Still, the raw utility of the alloy could not be denied. Grazin gave the order to proceed. The battle cruiser opened fire. 100 glowing balls of white light streaked towards the target cube. Antimatter. Scarlax loved antimatter weapons. Whenever antimatter collided with normal matter, the annihilation effect would create an explosion. Scarlax loved explosions. The balls of light moved in a perfect line. They struck the cube in sequence. 100 explosions filled the view screen. When they subsided, Grazin asked, "Effect?"
"The weapon left a depression in the target," one of the technicians reported. 20 centimeters wide, 14 millimeters deep. "Impressive!"
Primox Ktheen preened.
"Not really," said Grazin. "The damage output is sufficient to destroy a small, lightly armored craft, but the antimatter is highly susceptible to point defense. A simple laser will destabilize the field holding it in place, and a particle beam will cause it to detonate prematurely."
He leaned down to look at the battlecruiser's captain.
"Your antimatter projectiles need to be at least 6 times faster to be used in combat. As it is now, the enemy is likely to detonate them before they exit your guns. I rate it a 7.6 out of 10.
"Primox Grazin is just jealous of your damage output,"
Ktheen scoffed.
"I rate it a 9.9.
"It's as much a danger to your ship as it is to the enemy," Frel intoned. "But the damage is impressive. I will give you an 8.5.
The demonstrations continued. Ship after ship fired the best cannons their companies could devise. Guided plasma balls, phased disruptors, molecular disintegration rays. None of the other weapons did as much raw damage as Ktheen's cruiser, but several earned higher ratings overall. The humans went last. Ktheen clacked and Frel scowled when the human representatives stood before them. Heather, Commander, and Doctor all bowed in unison.
"Don't waste our time with niceties, Prims,"
The Scarlac hissed.
"Get on with it!"
Commander looked to Primox Grazin. The Primox gave a single nod. Commander spoke into his communicator. Fire! The glorious purpose bucked. The human ship was suddenly moving backwards at nearly 6 meters a second. Recoil? Grazin frowned, but the explosion that followed tore his gaze away from the human's jalopy. The cube was gone. All that remained were rapidly moving chunks of shrapnel.
"What the—"
Primox Frel's mouth was hanging open. Grazin almost went slack-jawed himself, but he maintained his composure enough to ask, "Effect?"
"Stand by, great Primox,"
said the technician. The judges waited. After 2 minutes, the technician spoke again.
"The weapon penetrated 3.26 meters into the target, then detonated. The target has been destroyed."
The target has been destroyed,
Grazin echoed. No one had ever said those words about an inviolum cube.
You, Lanka!
Primox Frel jabbed a finger at Commander.
Explain!
The weapon is called a railgun, Great Primox, Commander explained. It uses magnets to rapidly accelerate a projectile. This particular projectile was packed full of antimatter, which detonated on impact.
Impossible!
Thien sputtered.
No projectile can pierce inviolum! It's the strongest substance in existence!
There is an old Earth saying, Primox, Doctor spoke up. A riddle our engineers like to share. He held up a small object. Do you know how many aluminum cans it would take to destroy a moon?
That's a ridiculous question,
hissed Thien. The answer is 1, Primox Thien, the human grinned. Just 1, at sufficient velocity. Thien looked like she was going to jump down and kill the human. Grazin interrupted.
And how fast did you throw that projectile?
612 kilometers per second, Doctor said proudly. He frowned. That's the best we can do, though. Any faster and the recoil will destroy the ship.
How could that scrap heap even survive that much energy?
Thien demanded. It wasn't easy, said Doctor. Reinforcing the ship and protecting the crew was a lot harder than building the gun itself. Even now, I wouldn't risk more than a dozen shots without a complete refurbish. Primox Frel burst into laughter. The other judges turned to look at him.
Outstanding! The Grotto hollered. Absolutely outstanding!
Frel nearly fell over from the force of his guffaws.
I rate it a 10 out of 10!
Thien hissed at the Grotto.
A perfect score? Why would you?
She trailed off, staring at Grazin. She, too, began to laugh.
Yes, I agree. A perfect 10!
What?
Grazin looked between the two of them, confused. It took the Primox several seconds to understand. When he did, he gave them his most dignified expression.
Words cannot express how much I hate the two of you.
Primox Frel managed to tamp down his laughter enough to yell,
Quit stalking, Lanka! Tell these prims how you rate their weapon!
Primox Grazin glared down at the humans. Those firearms of theirs had better make him the richest Phylaxian in history. Even if they did, he wasn't sure it was worth it. Grudgingly, Grazin gave his judgment.
It's the most powerful ship-mounted weapon I've ever seen, but it comes with significant drawbacks. I rate it a 9.6.
Then, with all the dignity he could muster, Federal Primox Grazin yanked a handful of fur off his arm. He stuffed it into his mouth, and he began to chew.